We've seen some of this before, but what we're experiencing now, it's not normal. We've seen wildfires, heat waves, floods, droughts. We've seen higher food prices and rising insurance costs, and none of that is new. So why does this feel different? Because each event eventually passes, but the pattern doesn't. Each year seems to push a little farther than the last. But what if the individual event is not the most important part? What if the real signal is what keeps repeating, what begins to fail, and who ultimately pays the price? In this video, we're going to connect those signals, explain what they could mean for your household, and show you how to prepare without reacting to every headline or assuming the worst. Get the free city prepping brief and stay one step ahead of the events shaping our future. Each week, I share the risk I'm watching and the practical steps you can take now to prepare. Sign up for free at cityprepping.com/CPB or use the link below. If you're new here, my name is Chris, and on this channel we look past the headlines to understand what could affect your household and what practical steps make sense before a problem reaches your front door. The challenge with a video like this is that there's not a single event that tells us much on its own. The single extreme events, they grab the headlines, but the value comes from stepping back, comparing the signals, and asking whether they point to a broader change in the conditions that families should prepare for. In this video, we're going to look at a few of those signals that we're witnessing emerge, explain the pattern we should be realizing from them, and I'll tell you what you can do now about them. Stick around to the end as I'll give you a free guide to help navigate this issue. So where do we start in a discussion like this? The clearest place is with the heat itself. Extreme heat. Extreme heat is the most visible signal because it's the one that people feel first. It changes how long you can safely work outside, how hard you run your air conditioner, how much water your household uses, and how quickly a routine power outage can become dangerous. And before we proceed, I realize a lot of people are going to say, of course we're experiencing heat, it's summer. But what I'm talking about is beyond the average, moving into the extreme. Let me explain with real practical examples. Western Europe recently experienced another one of its hottest months on record, breaking records year over year, with unusually high temperatures covering a broad area rather than just a single location. And the most important point here is not simply that another record was broken somewhere else. The takeaway here is what prolonged heat does after it settles over a region. Power demand rises as millions of people cool their homes simultaneously, roads soften and buckle, rail systems impose speed restrictions because tracks can become warped. Here in the United States, that matters because rail carries roughly 40% of long-distance freight, including agricultural products, fuel, building materials, vehicles, and goods headed for local stores. Rivers may fall low enough to affect shipping and water supplies, and hospitals see more cases of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Farmers, they lose working hours, while crops and livestock remain exposed to temperatures they cannot escape. Meteorologists often describe one cause of prolonged heat as a heat dome, a strong area of high pressure that traps hot air over a region kind of like a lid. And researchers have also begun using the term flash drought to describe intense heat, wind, and low humidity rapidly pulling moisture from soil and vegetation. Now, instead of developing over an entire season, a flash drought can intensify within weeks, leaving farmers, water managers, and households little time to respond. And in both cases, persistence is the problem because homes, power systems, water supplies, crops, and people, they have less time to recover. One current example is unfolding across Ontario, where widespread wildfires have produced enormous smoke plumes that are visible from satellites and have sent haze deep into the United States. Images from Boston show yellow skies and an orange sun, while videos from areas closer to the fires reveal how large the burning areas have become. And it may seem like an extraordinary one-off, but similar smoke reached major American cities in 2023 and during the severe Canadian fire seasons that followed. The individual fires will eventually be contained, but the broader signal is harder to dismiss. Heat, drought, and dry vegetation can create conditions in which distant wildfires affect air quality, health, travel, outdoor work, and daily routines hundreds or even thousands of miles away. A single hot afternoon is uncomfortable, a prolonged heat wave creates cumulative stress, nighttime temperatures may remain high, preventing buildings and people from cooling down, air conditioners run longer and become more likely to fail, utility bills climb, older adults, young children, outdoor workers, people with medical conditions, and anyone without reliable cooling, they face greater risk. A household may be accustomed to preparing for storms, wildfires, or winter outages, but a blackout during prolonged heat presents a much different problem. indoor temperatures can quickly become unsafe, and especially in apartments, on upper floors, in mobile homes, and in densely built neighborhoods. Now, none of this means every heat wave is going to cause a grid failure, crop loss, or emergency. The signal is that longer, more widespread periods of heat can strain multiple systems simultaneously. And when that happens repeatedly, the margin for error begins to shrink. So what happens when the systems that are built to carry us through these conditions begin operating near their limits? Infrastructure stress. Most infrastructure does not fail all at once. It loses capacity first. Trains slow down, power plants reduce output, water pressure drops, equipment overheats, and repairs, they take longer. Systems that normally have room to absorb a problem, they begin operating with less margin, making even a minor failure harder to contain. During the Pacific Northwest heat dome in 2021, roads buckled, power cables sagged, drawbridges had to be cooled with water, and rail service was reduced or suspended. In the United Kingdom, extreme heat later damaged airport runways and forced transportation systems to operate at reduced capacity. And the strain extends beyond transportation. Heat drives electricity demand upward while reducing the efficiency of power equipment. Power lines can sag as they expand, transformers can overheat, and hydroelectric or nuclear plants may have to scale back when water levels fall or cooling water becomes too warm. And that can increase the risk of conservation requests, rolling blackouts, or local failures. Water systems can also be affected in ways most households don't immediately associate with heat. Drought lowers reservoir and river levels, warmer water can encourage harmful algae blooms, and heavy demand places additional pressure on pumps, treatment plants, and local storage. In 2014, an algae toxin in Lake Erie left roughly 500,000 people around Toledo unable to safely use their tap water for several days. Demand can rise precisely when a system's ability to meet it is falling. Pumps, treatment plants, communications equipment, and pressure systems, they all depend on electricity. So during a wildfire or a prolonged outage, a single failure can disrupt firefighting, drinking water, sanitation, and hospitals. The 2025 fires in Southern California showed how extraordinary demand can drain local tanks and reduce hydrant pressure even within a major metropolitan area. And it would be easy to dismiss these failures as isolated. The Pacific Northwest was not built for that level of heat. Britain experienced an exceptionally hot day. Another community had an aging transformer or a water system that could not keep up. But that may miss a larger point. The pattern keeps repeating. Conditions exceed what systems were designed to handle. Capacity falls as demand rises, and one local weakness begins to affect everything connected to it. Infrastructure built for yesterday's normal may still work most of the time, but it can become less reliable exactly when households need it the most. And that doesn't mean your community is about to lose power, water, or transportation. It just means that these failures should not be dismissed simply because they occurred elsewhere. And the same kinds of roads, transformers, rail lines, pumps, and cooling systems, they exist across the country. The next signal suggests that the heat we feel on land may be connected to a much larger amount of energy accumulating out of sight. Ocean temperatures. Most of the excess heat building in the climate does not remain in the air. It ends up in the oceans, which cover more than 70% of the planet and act as a massive heat sink. In simple terms, a heat sink absorbs and stores heat, and that matters because the oceans do not simply hold that energy. Over time, it can influence storms, rainfall, fisheries, coastal flooding, and other systems households depend on. The oceans can absorb an enormous amount of energy without the change being obvious to anyone standing on shore. That makes ocean temperatures less visible than a heat wave, but potentially more consequential. Warm oceans can continue absorbing heat, but their ability to take up additional heat efficiently declines. Recent measurements have shown unusually warm sea surface temperatures across larger portions of the world's oceans, with some regions exceeding the ranges expected from previous records. One chart or one warm month cannot tell us exactly what happens next, but the persistence matters. Oceans influence rainfall, storms, fisheries, coastal weather, atmospheric temperatures, and the movement of heat around the planet. Warm water provides additional energy and moisture for storms, and it does not guarantee that a hurricane is going to form, strengthen, or reach a particular community because wind patterns and atmospheric conditions, they still matter. But when a storm encounters unusually warm water, more fuel may be available. Warmer oceans can also contribute to heavier rainfall, higher humidity, and weather patterns that differ from what communities experienced in the past. The effects, they extend beyond weather. Marine heat waves, they can damage coral reefs, disrupt breeding and migration, push fish into cooler waters, and create conditions that favor harmful algae blooms. Some blooms produce toxins that contaminate seafood, they close fisheries, and contribute to large fish die-offs by depleting oxygen. The result can be lost income for fishing communities, reduced food availability, and higher prices moving through supply chains far from the coast. Scientists are also watching what warmer oceans mean for glaciers and ice shelves. Warm water can move beneath floating ice, weakening structures that help hold larger glaciers in place. Now, some headlines use terms like doomsday glacier, but even a major ice shelf failure would not raise sea levels overnight. The concern is the incremental effect. A few additional inches of sea level rise can worsen storm surge, increase routine flooding, accelerate erosion, push saltwater into freshwater supplies, and expose more homes, roads, ports, and utilities to damage. But the larger process may unfold over years or decades. But every additional rise can make future storms and high tides more disruptive. And this is where the pattern becomes harder to dismiss. Heat on land may pass when the weather changes, but oceans, they store that energy and then they release it slowly. And that can influence future heat, storms, rainfall, marine ecosystems, and coastal risk long after one headline disappears. And it's easy to describe this as a future generations problem, even as parts of it are already appearing in insurance costs, fisheries, flooding, food prices, and emergency planning. But the practical question is not whether one ocean temperature chart proves a particular future. It is whether additional energy in the ocean raises the possibility of stronger disruptions, less predictable weather, and more pressure on food, infrastructure, insurance, and household budgets. That's why ocean temperatures belong in this larger pattern. The effects, they may begin far from your home, but they do not necessarily stay there. One of the clearest places that pressure may appear is in the systems every household depends on several times a day. Food. Food systems. The effects of prolonged heat eventually reach the kitchen table. Food production depends on a narrow range of workable conditions, and when temperatures remain too high for too long, crops, livestock, farm workers, water supplies, and transportation, they can all be affected at once. Plants are especially vulnerable during pollination, flowering, and fruit development. A few days of extreme heat at the wrong point in the growing cycle can reduce crop yields even when a field looks healthy afterward. Flash drought can make the problem worse by pulling moisture from soil faster than farmers can replace it, increasing irrigation demand precisely when reservoirs and groundwater may be already under pressure. Livestock face similar limits. Cattle, poultry, and dairy animals, they eat less and produce less when they struggle to regulate their body temperature, while farmers need more water, shade, ventilation, feed, and backup power simply to keep animals healthy and productive. Drought also makes that calculation harder by reducing pasture and hay supplies, forcing ranchers to buy more feed or reduce herd sizes. The United States is already working on a historically small cattle herd after years of drought and high operating costs, which means another difficult growing season can affect beef supplies and prices long after the heat itself has passed. Before a calf is born, a seed is planted, or a chicken is hatched, farmers and ranchers, they make hundreds of decisions about weather, water, feed, labor, prices, and future demand. Those plans once relied on a reasonable amount of season predictability, but increasingly they are being made with more caution because one crop can be scarce while another is abundant. Feed costs, they can change quickly, and drought can force producers to sell animals they had planned to keep. That uncertainty is already becoming part of the food supply signal. Farmers may plant less, delay expansion, reduce herds, or avoid investments that could take years to pay off. And those decisions eventually influence how much food reaches the market and what households pay for it. No single heat wave is likely to empty grocery stores nationwide. The more realistic concern is the accumulation of pressure over weeks, months, and years. Lower yields in one region, livestock losses in another, disrupted fisheries, higher irrigation costs, and transportation delays, they can gradually reduce availability and raise prices. And when several producing regions experience stress in the same season, food security becomes less about whether food exists and more about how much it costs, where it's available, and which households can still afford it. Home gardeners, they're not immune. Plants that once performed reliably may struggle with hotter nights, faster evaporation, shifting pest pressures, or growing seasons that no longer behave as expected. Gardeners, they may need different planting dates, shade, mulch, more efficient irrigation, or crop varieties that are suited to higher temperatures. What worked a decade ago may not work as consistently under changing conditions. And this is another place where it would be easy to dismiss each loss as local or temporary. A damaged crop, a fishery closure, or a livestock die-off may not affect your grocery bill on its own, but food systems, they're interconnected, and repeated disruptions, they can travel through processors, transportation networks, wholesalers, and retailers before they eventually reach your community. Again, look at the current price of a pound of beef to see just one signal of this broader problem that I'm telling you about here. The signal is not that a universal food shortage is imminent. It is that producing and moving food may require more water, energy, money, and adaptation than it did before. And when those costs rise repeatedly, the next place a pattern appears is in what households pay to protect, repair, and maintain the lives they have built. Insurance costs. The final signal may be the one households feel most directly because it arrives as a bill. When heat, wildfire, flooding, storm damage, crop losses, and infrastructure failures become more frequent or more costly, the costs don't remain with the people at the center of the disaster. It spreads through insurance premiums, utility rates, tax repair costs, food prices, and the cost of rebuilding. Insurers are already reassessing which risks they can afford to cover and at what price. I can tell you that private insurance companies refuse to cover this property I use for this channel because it's in a zone deemed at high risk of wildfires. And you may be in a similar situation because of flooding, fire, or another natural disaster. Insurance companies now place you in a high risk category. And in some community, homeowners are seeing premiums rise sharply, deductibles increase, or coverage become harder to obtain. Even families that never file a claim can pay more because insurers price risk across a wider region. A damaging storm, wildfire, or prolonged outage several counties away can eventually affect what you pay for insurance at your own home. The same pattern appears outside of insurance. Utilities, they have to replace overheated transformers, reinforce grids, secure additional power, repair damaged lines, and manage higher peak demand. The companies, they pass those upgrades, repair, and maintenance costs directly to you. Cities have to repair roads, water systems, and public buildings designed for older conditions. And they may tax you to cover those costs. Farmers, transportation companies, processors, and retailers, they pass along higher operating costs wherever they can, and that shows up in your grocery and food bills. Eventually, many separate disruptions arrive at the households as one larger problem, less room in the budget. And that's why these signals matter even when no single event becomes a catastrophe. A household does not need to lose its home or experience a week-long blackout to feel the consequences. The pressure can build quietly through a higher electric bill, a more expensive insurance renewal, a costly air conditioning repair, or another increase at the grocery store. Each expense may look unrelated when it arrives, but we're connecting the dots here. Together, they may be the evidence that the cost of maintaining an ordinary, stable life is rising as the systems that support it come under greater strain. The question is no longer whether every signal proves one explanation. It is whether enough of them are pointing in the same direction that prepared households should begin adjusting before those costs and disruptions become harder to absorb. What it means. None of these signals has to become a full-scale catastrophe to change your life. The impact may arrive as a higher electricity bill, a failed air conditioner, a more expensive insurance renewal, a grocery budget that no longer stretches as far, or a power outage that becomes dangerous during extreme heat. This is how large environmental changes often reach ordinary households. Not all at once, but through a series of smaller pressures that become harder to absorb. Preparedness, it means recognizing when several risks are beginning to move in the same direction and deciding whether a few reasonable changes now could make your household less vulnerable later. That doesn't require panic, relocation, or spending money that you don't have. It just means accepting that some conditions once treated as rare may be becoming more common and that systems we rely on may not always respond as smoothly as they once did in the past. The real question is whether your household has enough margin to handle more heat, higher costs, longer outages, and less predictable disruptions than it used to. If the answer is no, practical preparedness should begin before those pressures become harder to manage. What to do? You have to understand that preparedness really begins before the shelves are empty, before the power goes out, and before everyone in your area realizes that they need the same solution. It begins before whatever disruption, large or small, reaches your doorstep, and it begins with recognizing a pattern early enough to act calmly. The smoke now reaching parts of the East Coast is really a good example. Canadian wildfires sent smoke into many of the same communities in 2023. People saw what it did to the air quality, outdoor activities, schools, travel, and health. And they knew large fires could happen again, and they knew smoke could travel hundreds or even thousands of miles. And yet, when the sky changes color and air quality warnings return, many households still find themselves scrambling to locate an air purifier, replacement filters, mask, or a room that they can keep reasonably clean. And that's not because the warning signs were invisible. It's just because many people treat each event as something that ended rather than as something that could happen again. And that is the habit we need to change. When a heat wave strains the grid, don't ask when things are going to cool back down. Ask what nearly failed and whether your household was ready for it. When wildfire smoke reaches your city, don't only wait for the air to clear, ask what you would need to do if it returned next month and lasted twice as long. When insurance becomes more expensive or difficult to obtain, don't treat the renewal notice as an isolated bill. Ask what the insurer may be seeing in your region and which risk your household may increasingly have to absorb. And when food prices rise after drought, livestock losses, transportation problems, or crop failures, don't assume they're going to automatically return to where they were. Ask whether your household has enough flexibility to absorb another increase. The goal is not to react to every headline because most headlines will not require action. The skill is learning to recognize when the same signal appears repeatedly, when several signals begin reinforcing one another, and when a practical solution is still affordable and available. And that may mean buying replacement air filters during clear weather instead of during a smoke emergency, servicing your air conditioner before the first major heat wave, reviewing your insurance before renewal, adding a little more food to the pantry while prices are stable, or testing backup power before the grid is under strain. And these are not dramatic preparations. They are decisions that are made early enough to remain affordable, available, and manageable. The signals that we've looked at are extreme heat, infrastructure stress, warmer oceans, pressures on the food system, and rising insurance costs. And none of us can solve those larger forces alone, but we can recognize how they may reach our households and reduce the most obvious points of vulnerability before they become urgent. To help with the specific risk of extreme heat, cold, and power loss, we have created a free extreme temperature survival guide. It walks you through cooling, heating, water, food, backup power, and protecting vulnerable people in your household. I'm going to place a link in the description in the pinned comments section below. The larger lesson is simple. Notice what keeps happening, understand how the signals connect, consider what larger pattern could mean for your household, and address the obvious weaknesses before the next event turns preparation to a scramble. We can't say with certainty exactly how these conditions will develop or how quickly they may affect one community or your community, but we can see enough to stop treating every heat wave, wildfire outage, crop problem, and insurance increase as an unrelated event that disappears when the headline does. The larger pattern is one of the systems operating under greater pressure with less room to absorb the next problem, and ordinary households are increasingly becoming asked to absorb the cost and disruption when these systems struggle. Preparedness, it gives us a practical way to respond with greater clarity, confidence, and control. So pay attention to what it repeats. Ask what it reveals about the systems your household depends on, and identify the weakness it exposed last time and address it with a solution while it's still available, affordable, and manageable. If grid strain and power outages are the area that you need to understand better, watch what actually happens in the first 60 minutes of a grid failure. If wildfire smoke and air quality are becoming recurring concerns where you live, watch how to build an affordable air purifier. I'm going to place both videos here on the side of the screen and link them in the description and comments section below. As always, stay safe out there.